They say you never really know who a person is until they have nothing left to give, and still choose to share it. The rain had started before noon, the kind that settled over Seattle without thunder or drama, turning sidewalks into mirrors and every passing stranger into a blurred reflection. By late afternoon, the city seemed quieter than usual, as if everyone had found somewhere warm to disappear. Everyone except Caleb Walker. He pulled the collar of his faded brown jacket a little higher as the chilly autumn wind slipped beneath the fabric. His work boots were still damp from unloading delivery trucks since sunrise, and every step reminded him that the Sauls had long ago lost their battle against the weather. Beside him skipped his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, wrapped in a bright yellow raincoat that was just beginning to look too small. She hummed softly to herself, carefully avoiding puddles as though they were oceans. "Dad," she asked with a hopeful smile, "do you think today they'll still have turkey sandwiches?" Caleb glanced at the folded bills inside his wallet. "Just enough." He smiled anyway. "I think we'll get lucky." The neighborhood cafe sat quietly on the corner, its windows glowing with warm light against the gray afternoon. Caleb wasn't there because he enjoyed expensive coffee. Every evening after 4, the owner discounted whatever fresh sandwiches hadn't sold. It was one of the few places where $10 could still feel like enough. Inside, the smell of baked bread filled the room. "One turkey sandwich left," the cashier announced apologetically before Caleb could even order. "Sorry. That's all we've got." Caleb looked down at Lily. She smiled. "That's okay. We can split it." He nodded. "One sandwich, please." The cashier wrapped it carefully in brown paper before sliding it across the counter. As Caleb reached for it, the cafe door opened again. A woman stepped inside. She looked to be in her late 30s, wearing an oversized gray hoodie beneath an old navy coat. Damp strands of dark blonde hair clung to her face, and although her clothes looked ordinary, there was something strangely composed about the way she carried herself. She quietly scanned the display case. Empty. The cashier offered an apologetic shrug. "I'm sorry." The woman lowered her eyes. "I understand." She turned toward the door without another word. Then, almost as if speaking to herself rather than anyone else, she whispered, "I haven't eaten since yesterday." Caleb froze. So did Lily. For a brief moment, the cafe seemed completely silent except for the steady tapping of rain against the windows. Caleb looked at the warm sandwich in his hands. It represented dinner. Maybe breakfast, too. He had exactly $3.17 left after buying it. His next paycheck wouldn't arrive until Friday. He could pretend he hadn't heard her. He could tell himself he had a daughter to think about. No one would blame him. Before he could decide, Lily gently tugged on his sleeve. "Dad?" She looked at the woman standing alone near the door. Then she looked back at the sandwich. "We can still split it." Caleb stared at his daughter for another second before letting out a slow breath. A tired smile crossed his face. "You're right." He walked toward the stranger and held out the warm paper bag. "We were going to share this," he said softly. "Looks like we'll just have to split it one more time." The woman looked up, startled. Her blue eyes searched his face as though she expected to find pity. Instead, she found only kindness. She hesitated. I can't take your dinner." Caleb shrugged gently. "Then don't." He carefully opened the wrapping, broke the sandwich into 2 uneven pieces, and handed her the larger half. "Just help us make sure none of it goes to waste." For the first time that day, the woman smiled. It was small. Almost fragile. Neither Caleb nor Lily noticed the black luxury sedan parked quietly across the street. Inside, 2 anxious security professionals watched through rain-covered windows, waiting for instructions from the woman they knew not as a stranger, but as Victoria Sinclair, the CEO of one of the largest companies in the Pacific Northwest. Victoria Sinclair accepted the sandwich with both hands, as though it were something far more precious than bread and turkey. "Thank you," she said. Quietly. Caleb simply nodded. "No one should go hungry." Lily grinned and took a bite from her smaller piece. "It's better when you share." she declared with complete certainty. For a second, Victoria couldn't answer. She had attended charity galas where million-dollar donations were announced beneath crystal chandeliers. She had shaken hands with politicians, investors, and celebrities. People applauded generosity whenever cameras were nearby. Yet somehow, the smallest act of kindness she had witnessed in years had come from a tired father wearing worn-out boots, who could barely afford dinner for himself. Outside, the rain continued falling. The black sedan remained parked across the street. Inside, Marcus Hayes, Victoria's chief of security, watched the cafe through binoculars. His phone buzzed. "Should we intervene?" one of the agents asked. Marcus looked toward the woman calmly eating half of a sandwich with two complete strangers. Victoria had made one rule before beginning today's experiment. No one was to interfere unless her life was genuinely in danger. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Negative. Back inside the cafe, Caleb crumpled the sandwich wrapper and smiled at Lily. "We should get going before the rain gets worse." Victoria hesitated. "So, where are you two headed?" "Home." "Is it far?" "About 20 minutes on foot." She glanced outside. The rain had become heavier. Without thinking, she asked, "Would you mind if I walked with you?" Caleb looked surprised. "You don't have anywhere else to be?" A tiny smile crossed her face. "Not today." He shrugged. "Then sure." The three of them stepped outside together beneath the gray sky. Lily happily jumped over puddles while Caleb held an old umbrella that leaned more to one side than the other. It was barely large enough for two people. Without saying a word, he tilted it toward Victoria instead. "What about you?" she asked. "I've been wet before." She noticed rain dripping from his hair almost immediately. He never adjusted the umbrella back toward himself. As they walked through the neighborhood, Victoria quietly observed everything. Caleb greeted the elderly crossing guard by name. He stopped so Lily could wave to a woman closing her flower shop. He thanked the bus driver who waited an extra few seconds while an elderly passenger climbed aboard. No one seemed impressed by him. But everyone seemed to know him. She had spent years studying leadership, organizational behavior, and customer loyalty. Yet this exhausted warehouse worker earned more genuine smiles during one city block than many executives managed in an entire quarter. "You know a lot of people," Victoria finally remarked. Caleb chuckled. "I don't know about that. They all know you. I guess when you've lived in the same neighborhood long enough, people remember you." Lily looked up proudly. "My dad fixes things." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Everything." Caleb laughed. "Not everything. Our neighbor's fence. Our teacher's bookshelf. Mrs. Dawson's mailbox. The church kitchen sink." Lily counted each one on her fingers. "He never says no." Victoria glanced sideways at him. "Do they pay you?" "Sometimes." "And when they don't?" He smiled without looking at her. "Then I still sleep fine." The answer stayed with her long after the conversation ended. She reached inside her coat pocket, instinctively touching the slim black credit card she had carried all day without using. For the first time in years, she realized it had been completely useless. Money could buy dinner. It could reserve entire restaurants. It could purchase buildings. But it could not buy the trust freely given to the man walking beside her. As they approached a modest apartment building with peeling paint and flower pots sitting carefully on every balcony, Caleb stopped. "This is us." Lily hugged Victoria unexpectedly. "I'm glad you weren't hungry anymore." Victoria gently hugged her back. "So am I." She watched Caleb unlock the weathered front door before turning toward the street. Across the road, Marcus straightened in the waiting sedan, relieved to see she was unharmed. Victoria took one last look at the father and daughter disappearing into the old building. She had left home that morning believing she was spending one day pretending to be poor. Instead, she had discovered something far more unsettling. She knew exactly how to build a billion-dollar company. But she had absolutely no idea how to build the kind of life Caleb Walker seemed to carry with him wherever he went. The people who change your life rarely realize they've done it. The following morning, Victoria Sinclair stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive boardroom overlooking downtown Seattle. Normally, the skyline filled her with quiet satisfaction. She had spent nearly 15 years helping build Sinclair Dynamics into one of the most respected technology companies on the West Coast. Today, all she could see was a faded brown jacket disappearing into an old apartment building. "Good morning, everyone." The board members greeted her as she entered the meeting. Financial reports appeared on the massive screen. Quarterly profits had exceeded expectations. Customer retention remained strong. Shareholders were happy. Everything looked perfect. Yet Victoria found herself staring at one sentence inside the presentation. Customer Trust Index, 81%. The number bothered her. Not because it was low. Because suddenly it felt impossible to measure. As executives discussed market expansion and productivity targets, Victoria remembered Caleb sharing his last meal without hesitation. No committee had approved that decision. No policy required it. No bonus rewarded it. He had simply seen someone hungry. By lunchtime, she left headquarters earlier than usual. Marcus was waiting beside the familiar black sedan. "You want to return to the apartment building?" he asked. Victoria nodded. "But no security around me," he sighed. "Understood." When she arrived, children were playing basketball in the small courtyard between the aging apartment buildings. An elderly woman waved toward the maintenance shed. "Looking for Caleb?" Victoria blinked. "How did you know?" She smiled warmly. "Everyone looking for help eventually asks for Caleb." Victoria followed the sound of hammering. Behind the building, Caleb stood on a ladder replacing loose wooden boards on a fence. His sleeves were rolled up despite the cool autumn breeze, and his toolbox rested on the ground beside him. He looked down and smiled in surprise. "You're not hungry again, are you?" She laughed for the first time in days. "No. That's good." He climbed down carefully. "So, what brings you here?" Victoria glanced toward the damaged fence. "I wanted to thank you properly." "You already did." "I don't think I did." He shrugged. "You don't know me anything." She noticed the elderly woman from earlier watching them from her porch. "Does she live here?" Victoria asked. Caleb nodded. "Mrs. Dawson. Is this your job?" "No." "Then why are you fixing her fence?" "Because the wind knocked it down." Victoria frowned. "And who's paying for the repairs?" "No one." She stared at him. "You bought materials?" "Yep." "You spent your own money." "Looks that way." "But why?" Caleb looked genuinely confused by the question. "Because she can't." As though the answer required no further explanation, he picked up his hammer and returned to work. Victoria stood silently beside him. After several minutes she finally asked, "How often do you do things like this?" He smiled without stopping. "Probably more than my bank account appreciates." Lily suddenly came running from the apartment building carrying a small lunchbox. "Dad!" She waved excitedly before noticing Victoria. "You're back." "I am." Lily handed the lunchbox to her father. "I packed your lunch." Caleb opened it. Inside was a peanut butter sandwich cut neatly into 2 triangles. One small apple. A handwritten note. "Love you, Dad." Victoria looked away for a second, unexpectedly overwhelmed. She had attended dinners where a single bottle of wine cost more than most families earned in a month. Yet somehow this tiny lunchbox felt richer than any banquet she had ever attended. As Caleb closed the lid, Victoria reached into her pocket and quietly removed several $100 bills. "Please," she said softly, "at least let me reimburse you for the fence materials." Caleb didn't even glance at the money. Instead, he closed her hand gently around it. "If I take that," he said with an easy smile, "Mrs. Dawson won't feel like her neighbor helped her." He nodded toward the old woman sitting on her porch. "She'll feel like some stranger paid someone to fix her fence." Victoria slowly lowered her hand. For perhaps the first time in her professional life, She discovered that generosity offered too quickly could sometimes steal another person's dignity instead of protecting it. And that lesson was worth far more than every dollar she was still holding. Sometimes the hardest truth to hear isn't that someone lied, it's why they thought they had to. 3 days passed before Victoria saw Caleb again. Not by accident. By choice. She had cancelled 2 investor dinners, postponed a television interview, and delegated a strategy session that normally would have taken priority over everything else. Instead, she found herself walking through the same neighborhood with no designer suit, no chauffeur in sight, and no title attached to her name. Caleb was locking up his toolbox outside the apartment building when he noticed her approaching. "You keep finding this place," he said with an amused smile. Victoria smiled back. "I'm beginning to like it. So, what can I help you with today?" She hesitated. The answer was simple. The words were not. "Coffee?" He looked surprised. "I thought you couldn't afford lunch." The joke landed softly between them. Victoria laughed. "I guess things are improving." A few minutes later they sat on a weathered park bench while Lily chased pigeons across the small square nearby. Steam drifted from 2 paper cups. For a while either of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Then Victoria quietly asked, "Can I tell you something?" Caleb nodded. "Sure." She stared into her coffee. "The first day we met." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "I wasn't completely honest." Caleb remained silent. "I wasn't homeless." He simply listened. "I wasn't looking for a shelter." Still nothing. "I wasn't even stranded." She slowly lifted her eyes. "I chose to spend the day pretending I had nothing." The words hung heavily in the autumn air. Finally, Caleb asked one question. "Why?" Victoria let out a slow breath. "I'm the CEO of Sinclair Dynamics." She expected confusion, shock, recognition. Instead, Caleb's expression barely changed. "I see." She blinked. "That's all?" "I've heard of the company." "You don't seem surprised." He shrugged lightly. "You never acted like someone who'd lived that life very long." She stared at him. "You knew?" "I guessed." "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because it didn't matter." For the first time since becoming CEO, Victoria found herself at a loss for words. "It matters now," she whispered. Caleb nodded slowly. "Not because you're rich." He looked toward Lily, who was laughing as she tried to catch a falling leaf. "It's because you believed one day was enough." Victoria frowned. "What do you mean?" "You skipped meals for one afternoon. You walked in old clothes. You got caught in the rain." He met her eyes calmly. "But poverty isn't one bad day." His voice remained gentle. "It's waking up every morning wondering which bill has to wait. It's pretending your daughter doesn't notice when you skip dinner. It's fixing your own boots because buying new ones means less food in the refrigerator." Victoria lowered her head. "I know." "No." Caleb shook his head, not with anger but with quiet certainty. "You know what one difficult day feels like." He paused. "That's different." The words struck harder than any accusation could have. She suddenly remembered all the reports she had read before beginning her experiment. Statistics. Charts. Income levels. Housing percentages. Customer surveys. She had mistaken information for understanding. "I thought I was trying to learn," she admitted softly. "I think you were." She looked up. "Then why do I feel like I failed?" Caleb smiled, though there was sadness behind it. "Because learning usually begins the moment we realize how little we actually understand." Neither of them noticed Marcus watching discreetly from across the street. He had expected an argument. Perhaps even anger. Instead, he witnessed something far rarer. A wealthy woman allowing her pride to crack. And an exhausted single father choosing honesty over resentment. Victoria swallowed hard. "I'm sorry I lied to you." Caleb considered her apology for a long moment before answering. "I'm not upset because you're the CEO of a billion-dollar company." His voice remained calm. "I'm disappointed because you believed." The only way to understand people like me was to become poor for a day. Victoria felt tears sting her eyes. For the first time since beginning her experiment, she understood that the greatest distance between them had never been measured in dollars. It had been measured in perspective. And crossing that distance would take far longer than 24 hours. Real change doesn't begin when your heart is touched. It begins when your decisions finally catch up with it. The conversation with Caleb followed Victoria Sinclair back into every corner of her life. His words echoed through the polished marble lobby of Sinclair Dynamics as she arrived the next morning. You know what one difficult day feels like. That's different. For the first time since becoming CEO, the building no longer filled her with pride. Instead, it felt strangely distant. Employees hurried past with coffee cups in hand, greeting one another politely before disappearing into elevators. Victoria noticed something she had never questioned before. No one stopped. No one lingered. No one really looked at anyone else. She entered the executive conference room where department heads were already waiting. Good morning, Ms. Sinclair. A presentation immediately appeared on the screen. Hiring efficiency. Profit margins. Productivity metrics. Employee utilization. Everything was measured. Everything was optimized. Everything except people. Halfway through the meeting, the Human Resources Director proudly announced, "We've reduced employee break times by 8% this quarter." Several executives nodded approvingly. Victoria didn't. And what happened to employee satisfaction? The room felt quiet. It declined slightly. Slightly? The director hesitated. About 12%. Victoria leaned back. What about turnover? Another uncomfortable pause. It increased. And absenteeism? Also increased. She slowly closed the report. So we saved minutes. Nobody answered. And lost trust. The silence was impossible to ignore. Later that afternoon, Victoria requested anonymous employee feedback reports dating back 3 years. She spent hours reading them alone. Some praised the company's innovation. Many praised the salary. But dozens repeated the same quiet frustrations. Managers who never listened. Parents afraid to leave when their children became sick. Employees skipping vacations because they feared looking uncommitted. One comment stopped her cold. I don't need another motivational speech. I need my supervisor to remember I'm a human being before I'm an employee. Victoria read the sentence 3 times. She remembered Caleb giving half his dinner away without asking what he might receive in return. Kindness had cost him a meal. Leadership, she suddenly realized, should cost something too. That evening she walked through the customer service department, unannounced. A young representative quickly minimized a family photograph on her computer as Victoria approached. You don't have to hide it, Victoria said gently. The woman looked embarrassed. My manager doesn't like personal distractions. Victoria glanced around. Every desk looked identical. Gray partitions. Gray chairs. Gray expressions. The office was efficient. It was also lifeless. Before leaving, Victoria stopped beside the break room. The coffee machine had an out of order sign taped to it. Someone had written underneath in black marker. Just like the appreciation around here. Several employees had added tiny smiling faces beside the sentence. Victoria smiled sadly. It wasn't rebellion. It was exhaustion wearing a sense of humor. The next morning she called an emergency executive meeting. Her leadership team entered expecting another discussion about quarterly projections. Instead, Victoria placed a simple brown paper sandwich bag in the middle of the conference table. The same kind Caleb had carried. The executives exchanged confused glances. What you're looking at, Victoria began calmly, is the most valuable leadership lesson I've received in 15 years. No one spoke. She continued. We've spent years asking how to make people work harder. Her eyes moved around the room. Starting today, we're going to ask a different question. She paused. How do we make people feel they matter? Outside the conference room, employees continued walking through the halls without. realizing that the culture of the company had just begun to change. Across town, Caleb finished another long shift unloading freight trucks. He had no idea that a single sandwich shared on a rainy afternoon had quietly crossed the city, entered the boardroom of a billion-dollar company, and challenged an entire system more effectively than any consultant, report, or executive retreat ever had. The greatest opportunities rarely arrive looking like rewards. Sometimes they arrive looking like tests. A week after the emergency leadership meeting, Victoria Sinclair stood in her office holding a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a financial report. It wasn't a proposal from investors. It was Caleb Walker's resume. 1 page. Warehouse associate. Maintenance experience. High school diploma. Volunteer work that filled nearly half the page. She read it twice. Then a third time. There was nothing extraordinary about it on paper. Nothing except the person she now knew stood behind every line. Victoria pressed the intercom. "Claire, would you schedule an interview with Mr. Caleb Walker?" Her executive assistant hesitated. "For which position?" Victoria looked out over the Seattle skyline. "Community Operations Manager." There was a brief silence. "That position normally requires a bachelor's degree and management experience." "I know. I'll arrange it." That afternoon, Caleb received a phone call during his lunch break at the warehouse. "Mr. Walker? This is Caleb. My name is Claire from Sinclair Dynamics. Ms. Victoria Sinclair would like to invite you for an interview." Caleb closed his eyes for a moment. He knew exactly why. "Thank you," he answered politely. "But I'm going to decline." Claire sounded genuinely surprised. "May I ask why?" "Because I don't want a job that begins with someone feeling they owe me." After ending the call, Caleb returned to unloading freight pallets as though nothing unusual had happened. Across town, Claire repeated his response to Victoria. "He turned it down." Victoria smiled faintly. "I thought he might." Later that evening, she drove to the neighborhood herself. Caleb was helping Lily practice multiplication at a picnic table. Outside the apartment building, Lily noticed Victoria first. "Hi." Victoria waved before looking at Caleb. "Can we talk?" He nodded. Lily politely excused herself to play with several children nearby. Victoria sat across from him. "You refused the interview." "I did." "May I ask why?" Caleb folded the worksheet Lily had been using. "You've spent the last week changing your company." "I'm trying. And I respect that." He met her eyes. "But if I walk into your building tomorrow because the CEO feels grateful..." He shook his head. "Every accomplishment after that will belong to your kindness instead of my ability." Victoria listened quietly. "I don't want Lily growing up believing opportunities come from favors." She glanced toward the little girl laughing on the playground. "I want her to believe they come from character and hard work." Victoria smiled. "She already believes that. Then I need to keep earning it." For a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally Victoria asked, "What if there were a position you earned the same way everyone else does?" Caleb looked at her. "A public posting. A normal application. The same interviews. The same hiring committee. No special treatment." He considered the idea. "If I'm the best candidate, you get the job. And if I'm not?" Victoria answered without hesitation. "Then you don't." A slow smile appeared on Caleb's face. "That's the only offer I'd ever accept." Victoria stood. "I was hoping you'd say that." She extended her hand. "Then we have an agreement." Caleb shook it. "One more thing," he said. "What is it?" "When the position opens..." He smiled warmly. "Don't tell anyone we know each other." Victoria laughed. "That might be the hardest leadership lesson you've given me." As she walked back toward her car, Marcus opened the passenger door. "So," he asked, "did he accept the job?" Victoria looked back at Caleb, who had already returned to helping Lily with her homework. "No." Marcus frowned. "Then why do you look happy?" "Because he reminded me of something every leader eventually forgets." "What was that?" Victoria smiled. The strongest people aren't looking for someone to open the door for them. She glanced once more toward the father and daughter. They're simply asking for the door to be unlocked. For the first time in years, she understood the difference. The strongest leaders don't build better companies by giving speeches. They build them by changing what people experience every single day. 2 months passed. The changes inside Sinclair Dynamics spread quietly at first. Employees noticed small differences before they noticed big ones. Managers were instructed to spend one afternoon each month working alongside their teams instead of watching from conference rooms. Parents were allowed flexible schedules when family emergencies happened. Unused vacation days were no longer treated like badges of honor. The broken coffee machine disappeared. In its place stood a handwritten sign. Take a break. You deserve one. The message wasn't signed. Everyone knew where it had come from. Victoria continued walking through the building almost every day without announcing her visits. She learned the names of receptionists. She asked engineers about their projects. She thanked janitors before leaving each evening. Some employees were suspicious. Others were confused. Most simply appreciated being seen. One Friday afternoon, Victoria stopped outside the customer service department. The same young representative she had met weeks earlier smiled as she packed her bag. My son's school play starts in 30 minutes. Victoria remembered the family photograph the woman had once hidden. Don't miss it. I won't. The young mother hesitated. Thank you? Victoria shook her head. No. She smiled gently. Thank you for reminding me why we work in the first place. Across the city, life remained much the same for Caleb. Warehouse shifts started before sunrise. Homework still filled the kitchen table every evening. Bills still arrived with uncomfortable regularity. Nothing had magically become easier. Yet something had changed. Lily noticed it first. Dad? What is it? You smile more. Caleb laughed softly. Do I? She nodded. I think making friends looks good on you. He smiled at the unexpected observation. Victoria had not solved his financial problems. She had not offered secret gifts. She had respected his dignity. That mattered more than he had expected. One afternoon, while repairing another loose fence board for a neighbor, Caleb heard someone call his name. It was Marcus Hayes. The security chief approached carrying a plain white envelope. No company logo, Marcus said with a grin. No special delivery. Caleb accepted it cautiously. What is it? A public job announcement. Marcus pointed to the front. Every requirement. Every deadline. Every applicant gets the same process. Caleb opened the envelope. Community Operations Manager. Sinclair Dynamics. Applications now open. He looked up. You could have emailed this. Marcus smiled. Victoria thought handing it to you personally might feel too much like another favor. So why are you here? Because the posting is public. He shrugged. I handed out copies at 3 community centers this morning. Caleb read the qualifications carefully. Leadership. Problem solving. Community involvement. Team collaboration. He smiled. For the first time, he wasn't reading an opportunity created for him. He was reading one he could honestly compete for. That evening, Lily watched him sitting at the kitchen table long after dinner. What are you doing? Updating my resume. She climbed onto the chair beside him. Is this the company with the nice lady? Caleb nodded. It is. Are you going to work with her? He smiled. Only if I earn it. Lily considered that answer. I think you will. Why? Because you always help people before they ask. Caleb looked at his daughter. Children often said simple things adults spent years trying to understand. He reached over and gently squeezed her hand. The next morning, before leaving for another warehouse shift, Caleb placed his completed application into a large envelope. No recommendations. No private phone calls. No shortcuts. Just his experience, his character, and the hope that somewhere inside a company learning to value people, those things would finally be enough. As he dropped the envelope into the mailbox, he felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in a very long time. Not certainty. Not expectation. But the quiet confidence that comes from knowing whatever happened next, he would face it standing on his own 2 feet. Success isn't measured by the moment someone opens a door for you. It's measured by what happens after you walk through it. 3 weeks after submitting his application, Caleb Walker sat in a quiet conference room inside Sinclair Dynamics. No one in the room treated him differently. Exactly as he had hoped. Across the table sat 3 interviewers. The Director of Human Resources, the Vice President of Operations, and an independent community advisor from a local nonprofit organization. Victoria Sinclair was nowhere in sight. She had insisted on that. If Caleb earned the position, it would be because the hiring committee believed in him. Not because she did. The interview lasted nearly 90 minutes. They asked about conflict resolution, leadership, budget limitations, volunteer experience. One interviewer leaned forward. "Tell us about a time you solved a problem without spending money." Caleb smiled. "Almost every day." The room laughed. Then he told them about organizing neighbors to repair an abandoned playground after the city delayed funding. Instead of complaining, parents donated time. Teenagers painted benches. Retired carpenters rebuilt broken equipment. No one waited for permission to improve their community. When he finished, the interview room had grown noticeably quieter. The community advisor simply wrote one word in his notebook: leadership. Outside the building, Victoria watched from her office window as Caleb exited through the front entrance. Marcus stepped beside her. "Did you watch the interview?" She shook her head. "No. You could have." "I promised myself I wouldn't." Marcus smiled. "That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't." She looked down toward the street. "But trust only matters when it costs something." 5 days later, the hiring committee gathered for its final decision. Victoria attended only as an observer. She had no vote. Human Resources reviewed every candidate. Education, experience, performance, community engagement, interview evaluations. One by one, names were discussed. Scores were compared. References examined. Finally, the committee chair looked around the room. "Any objections to our recommendation?" No one spoke. The decision was unanimous. Late that afternoon, Caleb heard another knock at his apartment door. He opened it expecting a delivery. Instead, he found Claire standing beside Marcus. Claire held a sealed envelope. "This isn't a favor," she said before handing it over. "It's a decision." Caleb opened the letter carefully. His eyes stopped on the second paragraph. "We are pleased to offer you the position of Community Operations Manager at Sinclair Dynamics." He read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Lily looked up from the living room. "Dad?" He smiled. "I got the job." She screamed with excitement before throwing her arms around him. "You did it!" "No." Caleb laughed through suddenly wet eyes. "We did it." That evening he accepted the offer. His first day arrived the following Monday. Employees welcomed him politely, unaware that only months earlier he had eaten lunch from a paper bag on a rainy sidewalk with the woman who now served as their CEO. Victoria greeted him in the lobby with a handshake identical to the one she offered every new manager. "Welcome to Sinclair Dynamics, Mr. Walker." He smiled. "Thank you, Ms. Sinclair." Either of them mentioned the park, the sandwich, the experiment, or the conversation that had quietly changed both their lives. Weeks later, Caleb attended his first leadership meeting. Department heads discussed expansion plans and community partnerships. When it was his turn to speak, he placed a simple brown paper sandwich bag in the middle of the conference table. Several executives exchanged curious looks. Victoria smiled without saying a word. Caleb looked around the room. "This," he began quietly, "is a reminder." He rested one hand on the bag. "Every person who walks through our doors is carrying something we can't see." He paused. Our job isn't just to build a successful company. His voice remained calm. It's to make sure no one has to hide their struggles before they're treated with dignity. No presentation followed. No graphs. No complicated strategy. Only silence. The kind of silence that appears when people recognize a truth they will never be able to forget. Some people change the world by building extraordinary things. Others change it simply by reminding us how ordinary kindness was always meant to look. 1 year later, the lobby of Sinclair Dynamics looked different. Not because the marble floors had changed. Not because the furniture had been replaced. The people had changed. Employees greeted one another by name. Managers paused long enough to ask, "How's your family?" New parents no longer apologized for leaving early to attend school events. Volunteers from every department gathered on weekends to repair parks, organize food drives, and mentor local students. The company's annual report still celebrated revenue growth. But for the first time in its history, the opening pages highlighted something else. People. Employee retention had reached a record high. Community partnerships had doubled. Customer satisfaction had risen beyond expectations. Profit followed. It always seemed to, once people stopped being treated like numbers. Caleb Walker had become one of the company's most respected leaders. Not because he spoke the loudest. Because he listened the longest. Whenever new managers joined Sinclair Dynamics, they attended his orientation session. There were no complicated slides. No leadership buzzwords. Only one simple sentence written across a whiteboard. Dignity is never a bonus. It is the beginning. The lesson always started the same way. Caleb placed an ordinary brown paper sandwich bag on the table. The room inevitably became curious. This, he would say with a smile, changed more lives than anyone who packed it ever imagined. He never explained the entire story. He didn't have to. The lesson wasn't about the sandwich. It was about the choice to share it. Across town, Lily was no longer the little girl who counted multiplication problems at the kitchen table. She proudly walked across an elementary school stage to receive an award for community service. When the ceremony ended, she spotted both Caleb and Victoria waiting in the audience. Without hesitation, she ran toward them. "I couldn't have done it without both of you." Victoria knelt beside her. "You earned that award." Lily smiled. "Dad says helping people is like planting trees." Victoria looked toward Caleb. "He says most people who plant them never get to enjoy all the shade." Caleb laughed softly. "I've said that once. It was enough." Later that afternoon, the three of them walked through the same neighborhood park where everything had begun. The rain was gone. Children filled the playground. Parents laughed on nearby benches. The city looked exactly the same. Yet somehow it felt completely different. They stopped beside the old bench. Victoria looked at Caleb. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't sat here that day?" Caleb smiled. "I don't." "Why not?" "Because someone else would have needed kindness." He looked around at the families enjoying the afternoon. The only question was who would give it first. Victoria sat quietly. A year earlier, she believed leadership meant staying several steps ahead of everyone else. Now she understood something far more important. Real leaders walked beside people. Before leaving, Lily reached into her backpack. "I made something." She handed Victoria a folded drawing. 3 people stood beneath a large tree. A father. A little girl. A woman holding a brown paper lunch bag. Above them, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "The richest people are the ones who help others feel seen." Victoria folded the picture carefully. It was worth more to her than every award hanging in her office. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, the 3 of them walked home together, not as a CEO, an employee, or the subjects of an unusual experiment. Simply as 3 lives forever connected by one ordinary afternoon, one shared meal, and one truth that would continue reaching people they would never meet. Because kindness, once truly understood, never ends with the person who receives it. It begins with the person who chooses to pass it on.